Teachers of Reddit, what's the worst thing you had to confiscate from a student? My mom has had stories about what she's confiscated from lower elementary age students. K3. The usual prank items like whoopee cushions. Sure. But one time a student was playing with this weird box. The box was locked, so she couldn't put it in the confiscated bin. She put it on top of a cabinet. About an hour later, it starts ringing. Furiously, it took some doing to get the box open. Turns out, this kid's parent was a professional chef, so the kid had grabbed every timer in the house, set them for the maximum amount of time, locked the box, brought it to school, and played with it, so it would get confiscated, and ring loudly. Whole class erupted with laughter and screaming. A true agent of chaos. Most dangerous, a knife from an 8th grader. Most annoying, different school than above, but a Wi-Fi jammer and a USB killing device from an 8th grader. Preschool teacher here. I had to convince a 4-year-old that his mom's wedding ring should go into a special box on the front desk instead of on the finger of a 6-year-old girl he had a crush on. Later he brought in his dad's car keys and a bottle opener. I had to confiscate hand sanitizer from a student who decided to drink it to get drunk and threw up everywhere. The weirdest one was definitely the fish in a vase they found during locker checks. It was in an unassigned locker someone had added a lock to. Inside was a live betta fish in about as large a vase as you can fit in a locker. Fully decorated. Someone had clipped a little booklight to the top of the vase presumably, so fish wasn't in the dark all the time. No one claimed to know whose it was or how long it had been there, so it lived in the coach's office for at least a year. A dead squirrel. I taught preschool at the time. I once did that too. My primary school girlfriend got kissed by a dude from her class, and I was super mad because he was stronger than me and I couldn't just get back at him with the same thing. The next day, I hear animals fighting on my way to school, and moments later, a squirrel falls dead from a tree. I have no idea what killed it, but it didn't look wounded, so I threw out my lunch and put it in the now empty bag. The kid who kissed my girlfriend was, and still is, a notorious liar, so when they found it in his bag, nobody believed it wasn't him, and he couldn't say anything to prove it wasn't. He wasn't even able to say that it wasn't even his bag where the squirrel was in, because he was known for stealing other kids' lunch. I guess it was my perfect crime. When I was in 5th grade there was an active market in live bees. Some kids figured out that the weight of the average 5th grader briefly stepping on a bee in the grass would stun it for about a minute without actually killing it. They started going out in teams to scout bees on the field, stun them, and carefully scoop them into plastic sandwich bags. They'd then sell them to other students who'd release them in classrooms to waste class time and scare people. You could get honeybees for 25 cents a piece. Bumblebees and yellow jackets cost more. Teachers and school admin started cracking down on this. Teachers literally confiscated live bees and plastic bags from students when found, and they eventually had to start having someone watch the field to catch students in the act. In 3rd grade, I once had my entire deck of only holographic UGR cards confiscated from me for playing with them during break time too much with friends. I was told I'd be able to get them back when I graduated school. 6th grade, I said okay, not totally understanding what was going on. I forgot about them completely, though I still kept a vested interest in the TCG for a few more years, like into 5th grade, until 9th grade. I went back and asked my old 3rd grade teacher to return my property. Within seconds, she pulls them out of her desk drawer and hands me them. It was an odd experience. My mom always told the story about my brother bringing a signed picture of Richard Petty to his class and telling everyone he was his dad. 2nd grade maybe, but that everyone forgot because the next kid pulled out an antique gun. Someone in my class had their phone taken because their Siri went off and said, "What do you need from me, slut?" I taught 1st grade and confiscated a piece of a broken beer bottle from a 6-year-old. It really surprised me because he was the sweetest kid. Turns out another classmate asked him to bring a weapon and hide it in the playground sand so that he could get back at another kid. I tried to do more life lesson things than suspension for both boys. BC they're freaking 6, but school policy had them both suspended for a few days. Not a teacher, but I watched quite a funny confiscation while in detention as a sophomore in high school. I was reading a book just trying to make the time go by when our vice principal, who was monitoring detention that day, stepped out for a moment. All of a sudden I hear a cracking sound and I look up from my book to see a broken egg on the floor. The few kids in the room look around at each other confused. Nobody owns up to it, and nobody knows who did it, because we were all distracted when it happened. The vice principal returns, doesn't notice the egg, but he's so engrossed in his paperwork that this kid still gets away with throwing another egg. Everyone looks up. The VP asked what that noise was, and this kid holds up a broken pencil and apologizes. Everyone goes back to minding their business, but all the students now know who the culprit is. Finally, this kid throws one last egg, but unfortunately the VP looked up from his papers right as he threw it. He walked over to the kid's desk, asked him what he thought he was doing, and the kid goes just cracking jokes. VP holds out his hand and the kid reveals an entire carton of eggs from under his sweatshirt and hands it to him. VP looked so unfazed that I honestly wondered what else that man has seen. I was honestly glad I got detention that day. Not a teacher, but this is the worst thing I had confiscated. It was 1984 and I was 9 years old. Back then it was common for parents to buy loads of fireworks for November 5th in Britain, Guy Fawkes Night. I got a load of them on around November 1st and emptied them into a cardboard toilet roll that I'd sealed up at one end, made a fuse from blue touch paper and stuck it in, then used masking tape to seal the top. I was 9 years old. I took it to school and was showing a kid in class during a lesson. The teacher, a guy in his 60s, saw I was distracting people, so called me up and asked what it was. I explained and he confiscated it. At the end of the day, he called me over, told me not to bring things like that into school, and then gave it back to me. And that was the end of the matter, until I set it off a few days later, and it set fire to a hedge. Kids, the 80s really were a different time. Not a teacher, but I'm half deaf and my music teacher took my hearing aid and refused to accept that it wasn't an earbud. Then he yelled at me for the rest of the class for not playing in tune. Couldn't exactly tell how well I was playing since I could hear it. My friend is diabetic and has an insulin pump. They had multiple teachers over the years think it's an MP3 player and try to confiscate it before realizing it's attached to their body and they literally can't hand it over. So this was less confiscated and more this student ended up just leaving this in my room and we had to throw it away. But it was certainly weird and is among my favorite things. I have a student this year who has brought some interesting things in. He's in 7th grade and this is usually beyond the age students play show and tell to begin with. Things included a Russian nesting doll of household items, lunch boxes, crayon bags, a plastic egg and many things in between. 8 or 9 total, leading to a paper with Joe Biden written on it, and a jar of other people's hair. He was asking his teachers to add to it. This somehow beats both. Over the course of what feels like a week, this student had been collecting cherry tomatoes at lunch and saving them. Eventually, he had a handful of them. He named each one. He drew a face of each. He had created a family of tomatoes. He even began dressing them in tape-created safety seats. Only the children tomatoes though. He even had a French fry boat for a vehicle to carry his tomato family to each class. Eventually he left it in our class over weekend and the tomatoes went bad. We had to toss them. He asked us not to call TPS on him. Tomato Protective Services. I love this kid. Not mine, but my fiance's coworker confiscated a makeshift shank from a 3rd grader, roughly 8 years old, made from a popsicle stick and a straw. He said he was going to use it on his animals at home. Best part was, when they told the dad, he said, "Why did you give him supplies to make a shank? I assume he's gonna kill a few people in the future." My mum has been a primary teacher for her whole life now, in the UK, and the worst incident she had to deal with was with a girl aged 10 who was having issues with a boy essentially bullying her. She told her dad, and her dad's solution was to give her a sawn-off shotgun to intimidate the boy. No one knew it was unloaded, but the hell it raised when a 10-year-old schoolgirl brings out a shotgun certainly put the boy off from ever coming near her again. I'm sorry, but the image of a little 10-year-old holding what is probably a 12-gauge sawed-off shotgun is hilarious to me. Probably was a quarter the size of her, and would send her half a kilometer in the other direction if she tried to use it. Thank God it was unloaded though. That would have been a very, very traumatizing day for everyone involved. I didn't confiscate anything, but this is a good story nonetheless. One of my high school students, grade 10, so about 16 years old, walked into class and threw his school bag down on the ground beside his desk. About 20 minutes later, as I'm teaching, I smell beer. I called the student who threw his bag down on the ground over to my desk and took him outside into the hall. He told me he has a 6-pack of beer in his bag for a party after school and it broke when he threw his bag down. I told him to go and remove his bag and clean up the mess with paper towel. I didn't involve admin, call his parents, and the students didn't notice. He got rid of his bag, cleaned up the mess quietly and calmly, and we moved on with our day like nothing happened. Sometimes kids just make bad mistakes, and I could tell this kid was terrified about the consequences. Know a teacher. She and her first or second grade class, can't remember which, were on lunch. Lunch lady walks up and tells her one of her students just tried to buy an extra something with over $1,000 in cash she had stuffed in a tiny coin pouch that looked like a plushy pink duck. Teacher called the girl's house and the mom was 9.8 into a full-blown 10/10ths panic after looking for it all morning. This was the early 2000s, when it was still normal to pay bills in cash, in person. Apparently they forgot to give the girl her allowance, 50 cents, so she took the paper money instead. My dad told me he once had to restrain a student and confiscate a pencil sharpener, one of the cheap plastic ones, which he had done a decent job of sharpening his pinky with. My dad has a master's in English and special education. He works with special needs at-risk kids and has had to take knives and all sorts of stuff from his kids. I just want to give him credit because he deserves it. It's hard, thankless, and no one wants to do it. Not a teacher, but in 7th grade I got caught with a knife. Didn't realize that I had it until I was on the bus. I'd worn this pair of jeans to walk to my buddy's house up the road on Sunday and had my little pocket knife in my pocket. I have an uncle who has always been a whittler/carver and makes really impressive stuff. I'd gotten a small knife and was trying to learn also. Anyway, Monday morning I got up and just threw those same jeans on and hurried to the bus stop. Realized my pocket knife was still in my pocket about halfway to school. In second period, gym, I told my buddy that I'd accidentally brought my pocket knife to school and didn't know what to do with it. He thought I was bullshitting him, so he yelled to the coach that I said I had a knife. She patted me down and found it. Straight to jail. Had to wait there for my parents to come pick me up. Got kicked out of school for a month. Didn't have to do any schoolwork during that time, and missing a month of assignments and homework didn't count against me. But the boredom of staying home alone every day watching The Price is Right and soap operas was torture. Not necessarily the craziest thing to confiscate, but the effect that confiscating the item had on the student was pretty upsetting. For background, I'm an elementary special education teacher for students with emotional disabilities and intense behaviors. These students have behaviors that range from yelling, throwing things, and leaving the classroom to students who have attempted suicide and students who have assaulted their peers or the school staff. I even had a student go for a cop's gun one time. The student in question was in first grade at the time and fairly low-key compared to some of the other kids I had. This student and I had a good relationship as I was one of the only male staff in the building. He lacked a reliable male figure in his life, and for the majority of his kindergarten year, I was the primary teacher working with him. One day my student had asked to use the restroom, and for most of my students, our staff will escort them to and from the restroom. So I went with him. Now it's been several years, so the details are fuzzy, but somehow it was brought to my attention that there was burnt toilet paper in the boys' restroom. I can't remember if my student or another student told me, but I want to say it was my own student. This sets off some alarms in my head, so I contact my admin team so they are aware. As we are going forward with our day, I notice that my student is fidgety and messing with something in their jacket pocket. So I ask them if I can check their pocket, and instead of saying yes, he pulls out a little big lighter and tells me that he found it and asks me to keep it a secret. Of course I can't just turn a blind eye, so I report it to my admin team and we sit down with the student to talk about fire safety. We explained how playing with lighters isn't safe and that he could hurt himself or others if he accidentally started a fire. That got out of control. My student feels awful. He's apologizing and feeling remorseful. He admits to us that he had been messing around with lighters at home when his mom was sleeping. We contacted his mother to tell her what had happened and what he had told us, and her response was unfortunate. She was furious with us, told us there was no way that he had brought a lighter and that it must have been planted by a peer, that we coerced a confession out of him, and that she was pulling him out of school immediately. Within a year the family's house burned down, and my former student was severely burned in the fire.